You gave a very nice overview of what's happening in the economy in general, on average, if you will, the macro statistics you opened up your presentation with, which describe a fairly stable to slightly positive picture in many ways. But I wonder, when do you think it's time for us to start thinking a little differently about the data that we look at? Because I saw some data recently where they disaggregated what's happened to two kind of portfolios of the population, the top 40% and the bottom 60%, and they track this since 1980. And when you look at that data, you see a very different picture. People in the top 40%, their incomes on average are up about 40% since 1980, and in the bottom 60%, they're flat. The top 40% on average used to be worth 6 times more than the bottom 60%. Now they're worth 10 times more than the bottom 60%. The top 40% used to spend twice as much on education for their children than the bottom 60%. Now they spend 4 times as much on education for their children. The retirement savings of the top 40% on a relative basis compared to what they'll need for retirement have actually improved since 1980, and the story is very bad for the people in the bottom 60%. Life expectancies back in 1980 for both of these groups were actually extending, and now for the first time in quite some time we're actually seeing life expectancies of people in the bottom 60% going down. So I'm just wondering, when do you think we as policymakers, you in your position at the Federal Reserve and us as policymakers here on the Hill, have to actually start thinking differently about decisions we make based on the disparities that are starting to grow in our country? And I'm not talking top 1%, et cetera. I'm talking about large disaggregation pools, top 40% versus top 60%, because it seems to me that that bottom 60% is also particularly vulnerable to two macro trends that are going on. One, rapid change in the future of work based on automation and innovation. They're much more likely to have their jobs disrupted. And then further, they rely much more on important government programs that are likely to come under continued stress.